So in 2018, I set a new goal for myself, and that was to read more. I challenged myself to read 12 books in 2018, which is a lot for me because that's about 12 times more books than I read in 2017. So if you're into reading, or you're interested to see what books I'm reading, or you want to join me on Goodreads and swap recommendations, visit popcornfinance.com/books to learn more. Hey, this is Chris. Hope you're doing well, and welcome to Popcorn Finance, where we discuss finance in about the time it takes to make a bag of popcorn. Appreciate you coming back, joining me for another episode. And today's show is going to be centered around kind of like a conversation, a topic I brought up on Instagram, of all places. I put together like a little quick story on Instagram, and it was because I've been looking at some profiles for tiny homes on the app there, and I got a really great response. People were kind of like interested in the topic. You know, for me, I've been fascinated for tiny homes for a while now, even though I'm not the tiniest person, but it's just a really cool, I think, lifestyle and something definitely out of the box. And I took some pictures from an Instagram account, Dream Big, Live Tiny. And the founder, he actually got back to me and sent me a message, and we kind of had a conversation. And that leads us to today's episode, where I'm joined by Alan, who's the founder of Dream Big, Live Tiny. How's it going, Alan?
Good, Chris. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, definitely. Thanks for taking some time to sit here and talk with me. You know, Dream Big, Live Tiny. It's a really cool site. It's kind of like a one-stop shop for everything tiny living. You know, they have design inspirations. They have some really cool like images of some tiny homes that are out there and the different layouts. They have different travel stories, different destinations where these homes are located. It's just a really cool resource overall for the whole tiny home movement, I guess you could say. I really wanted to bring Alan on because my fascination of it, which I talk about all the time with my wife, it's based around this like kind of alternative lifestyle, a way of kind of taking, you know, what we normally are expected to do and kind of breaking it up and seeing how it can impact you in different ways financially. I think gives you a little more freedom. And so just to start everything off here, Alan, would you mind kind of just explaining what a tiny home is for people who maybe never even heard of that?
Absolutely, Chris. So tiny home, it can basically be broken off into kind of a pretty simple explanation that anything under 400 square feet could be technically considered a tiny home. There's some people that are pretty strict about that square footage, but we kind of basically feature anything under 500 square feet. We consider those tiny homes. They could be homes on foundations, so built to basically be stagnant and stay where they're built, or more popularly, they could be built on wheels to be able to tow around and basically take them and park them wherever you want to kind of settle down for a short or a long period of time.
What do you find to be the most popular option? Do people typically go with the trailer option versus, having like a solid foundation?
I mean, there's no, real number out there, but based on what we've kind of seen in the market, there's seems to be a little bit more homes on wheels. And of course, it's just a little more practical. A lot of people who are interested in tiny living really just want to have the opportunity to basically move it around if they get kind of sick of where they're staying for a little bit. Gives them the opportunity to travel as well, which is a big sort of inspiration and a big goal of a lot of tiny enthusiasts. But of course, we still have, big representation in the market for foundation tiny homes. And essentially, a larger portion of these are what we call accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, which are basically built in people's backyards. Some people build them to have some extra space when families are coming in. And more popularly now these days, people are starting to build these ADUs in their backyards to basically create a secondary income in their household. They'll list them on Airbnb, and they start generating a little bit more income to help pay off their mortgage on their house. Now, there's a very small percentage of people who I've seen actually flip this concept, and they build an ADU and they actually live in the tiny home itself, and they rent their larger home, which of course, leads to a bigger cash flow that helps them pay off their home, incredibly quickly. But that's definitely a minority, but we're seeing a little bit more of that as well.
Oh, nice. I love the flexibility that you can get from these tiny homes, because I think it's a completely different way of kind of looking at, your living situation,
right,
and gives you some options that you normally wouldn't have if you had a traditional home with a traditional mortgage, which can be, in the multi-hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was really what I wanted to talk to you about today specifically was, how choosing to live tiny can free you up financially in different areas. Because I think, I think it's pretty, safe to assume that a tiny home is cheaper than a traditional home.
Right.
But, I want to get your take on, what have you seen as far as like what opens up to people financially by making the choice to live in a tiny home?
Absolutely. So definitely, financial reasoning is one of the big kind of motivations for people to pursue or to kind of start thinking about downsizing and living tiny. And this basically just comes from, steadily increasing real estate prices across the U.S. Basically everywhere we've seen that to be the trend. And in a lot of places, those rental rates or mortgages are growing, at a pace that outpaces, how quickly our wages are increasing.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes everyone rethink, this idea of, living and basically contemplating what we really need in life as opposed to what we want. And that's kind of a really unique place for tiny living right now is, of course, tiny homes are a much cheaper alternative. Nowadays, the average home in the U.S. is upwards of $230,000, $240,000, and in some places that's pretty affordable. But a tiny house, depending on whether you build it or whether you buy it from a builder, that will definitely have some impact on how much the home ultimately costs. But when you're something from a DIY build, depending again as well on the materials you use, whether you salvage some materials or you purchase some new, you could build a nice 180 square foot, 200 square foot home for anywhere around 10 to 15,000 building it yourself.
Wow.
And of course, some of the builders that are catering to more luxurious tiny homes and slightly larger homes, they're starting to focus a little more on trying to minimize that gap between, coming from a huge, 2,600, 3,000 square foot home to a tiny space. And they incorporate a lot of, luxuries that people would be comfortable with, really nice appliances, bathtubs and things like that. And you start seeing these homes basically anywhere in the range from 75 to 100,000.
Okay.
Of course, it's more expensive, but comparative to, a traditional mortgage, it's still a huge difference. So, by no means are they cheap because there's still a significant upfront cost, especially a lot of people who are buying them outright and not taking out a mortgage. You do have, pretty big expense on the front end, but a lot of those cost savings you spread them out over time. And that's where, the savings really start to make sense and they start adding up.
I wanted to ask you too, because you brought up a couple of interesting things there. One, I never even thought about this. Do they offer a traditional mortgage for a tiny home, especially ones that are kind of pushing close to 100,000?
That's a great question. So not currently, and we're starting to see some changes in the market, some positive changes in the market, but for the homes that are on wheels, currently they're still considered recreational vehicles. And so that allows them to be towed as well. So there's some positives and some negatives to that. When it comes to financing options, we're limited because they're considered RVs. And so what the loans end up typically looking like are you see lower terms on the loans, anywhere from 5 to 8 years, and you see slightly higher interest rates, which, is not terrible when you consider the ultimate price of the home, but it's something to consider and why some people end up waiting maybe a couple of years more to be able to either put on a larger down payment or just be able to afford the home outright with their savings, which could save them a lot of those interest costs.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, which is probably a good practice anyway. So, take some time to really save up and kind of put a dent in that cost anyways.
Yeah.
And, too, for some people who maybe are not familiar with tiny homes and they're hearing some of the square footage numbers you're throwing out there, it could sound like overwhelming or extreme to go to something so small.
Right.
But I think one of the things that people should really do is check out some images. Definitely go to your Instagram account. You have some great pictures there. And I think there's a difference when you're looking at something small that's been designed to be small and it's laid out properly.
Absolutely.
Versus a place that is just small. Because I know when my wife and I, when we first got married, we lived in like a small studio apartment. It was like 400 square feet, but it wasn't designed to be small. It just happened to be small.
Right.
And nothing really worked well. It was just kind of crowded. You had stuff in weird shapes, and the bed didn't quite fit, and it was like it just became very weird. I think that's maybe the image most people get of a tiny home. It's like this really small space that you can't fit anything in, but really, the way they're designed, it's amazing kind of how it ends up looking much bigger than you think it would be.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Chris. And that's something I hadn't touched on yet. But, over the years, as the movement has gained some popularity and a lot more people are getting involved on the design side, on the enthusiast side, on the builder side, we're definitely seeing a lot of improvements on just the floor plans, the designs of the homes. It's something that, when the movement started, it really was just about the square footage. But more people getting involved. A lot of people put a lot of focus on, making things multifunctional, multi-purpose, and really just making the space look a lot larger than it really is. I've seen some homes that they say 200 square feet, but I'm just, incredibly impressed every time I go in there and I'm like, are you sure? I think this looks like, 300 or 400 square feet, but that's just because the space is designed so well and it's designed for that specific purpose. There's tons of storage solutions, under the floor, in the stairs. There's a lot of innovation going on in the movement, and that's something that's really exciting. We're seeing that, continuously, and, everyone is sort of innovating together and kind of building off of each other's designs. And I think it's wonderful. I think, it's becoming a little bit like a shared sort of system where people are bringing the best ideas from one thing and incorporating their own. And it's really providing better solutions and better looking homes, better functioning homes as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've seen some really great layouts that have made me want to just move out into a tiny house right away.
Sell everything immediately.
It's like I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Alan, as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say is maybe one of the biggest financial, I don't know if benefits is the right word, or just I guess biggest financial impacts you've seen from some of the people you've talked to who've made the decision to move into a tiny home?
I mean, there's a few things. We already talked about basically the upfront price, the mortgage. That's a huge saving for a lot of people. But secondarily, I would probably say some of the utility costs. Of course, with a smaller home, you still have some upfront costs on utilities that are just naturally going to occur. But with a space, 1/5, 1/10 of the size of a traditional home, you're seeing some incredibly affordable rates for covering your utilities. And that's assuming that you're building the home that's on grid and using, traditional electricity and water and everything. But of course, there's also alternative ways to build a home. And a lot of focus is being put on building them for off-grid purposes, incorporating solar panels. Because the space is so small, the price, of course, there's still a high price for upfront, for installing a system like this. But over time, it starts to make a lot more sense. We're seeing composting toilets, propane appliances, the stoves specifically, as opposed to gas or something, or electricity. These are kind of the little things that might not seem like they make a big impact, but you start adding these things up on a monthly basis, spread out over a couple of years, and it really starts to add up and starts to make the difference for a lot of people. And it's really, one thing to kind of think about besides just that cost is what are you doing with that additional money that you're not spending otherwise. And that's, one thing we like to preach a lot is not wanting a lot of things, basically just living off of what you need and then investing that additional money into things that you're really passionate about, that you now have the opportunity to enjoy a little bit more, or investing in your future. A lot of people that basically downsize to live tiny are doing that almost exclusively for financial reasons. Either one, to have a better opportunity to pay down their debt, whether that's student loan debt, credit card debt, or other forms of debt that they have. And secondly is to save, either for a big purchase they might want to do in the future, for their kids' education, or just for their retirement. And those are things that, over the course of a couple months, years, they starts to add up, those savings, and gives you an opportunity to, have a bigger nest egg at the end of maybe when you decide to stop living tiny, or maybe you live tiny for the rest of your life. It's definitely something to consider.
Oh no, that's a really good point. First your point about the utilities, I didn't even think about that. I think I was thinking, it's way cheaper than. Well, I live in Southern California, so I was like, a tiny home, even at $100,000, is like a bargain for me out here.
Right. Absolutely. And for some, it might be a little bit too much, but
exactly.
but I think there's something for everyone.
And then, but the utilities, the fact that would add up over time. I didn't even consider that part because you're, a smaller space. You said alternative types of energy sources. So yeah, that's for one is like a big savings there. And then also I really love the point about taking what you're saving and actually using that to invest towards something for your future, whether that is, like you said, for your retirement or your savings in general, or if you're paying down debt, it gives you some flexibility that maybe paying, traditional rent prices or mortgage prices wouldn't afford you. So no, I think that's really something great to keep in mind. I mean, always, if you have the opportunity to save some money or to cut back on some expenses, to actually put that to work for something else other than, having a great meal every few days, something like that.
Right. Or buying more things, you really don't have, when you already make the commitment to live tiny, it's hard to go out and buy, those 5 or 6 pairs of shoes in a year because you might want them and you might have, the funds to do so, but now you just don't have the space. Right. So it's something to consider, you just have to prioritize and what's important in your life. And then it gives you, the opportunity to put that extra money to something else. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I need to tell my brother to move into a tiny house. Maybe he'll take some of those shoes he has.
Well, he might end up turning the entire house into a shoe room or something like that.
Actually, you know what? Yeah, that's probably a real possibility. So maybe not.
An extra closet. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Alan, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming by and talking with us about tiny living. I think this is really interesting. I hope everyone else enjoys this conversation because I think it's a great topic. And I think at the very least makes people think about the way we live in a different way. Maybe give you the ability to maybe consider a different lifestyle than what you see out there and is considered the norm. So no, definitely appreciate you talking about that and sharing some of your information.
Absolutely, Chris. I really appreciate you having me on. I had a lot of fun and, hopefully, this gets people thinking a little bit about not so much, that I want everyone to live tiny, but just kind of want to get the message out that it's not really so much about the tiny house, but it's about the life that it affords. I think we preach that there's 3 ways that we believe people can live tiny. 1, living physically tiny, so downsizing into a smaller space. 2, living financially tiny, so downsizing your financial obligations, cutting down that mortgage to something a little more feasible, cutting your utilities, your spending. And then 3rd, living materially tiny. So the things that you own, your possessions, basically you just don't have a lot of room for that. So, if tiny living isn't for you at this point in your life, then I would say, don't be discouraged. There's ways that people are living tiny right now that don't necessarily involve them physically living in a tiny home. But if it's something you're interested in, one step would be to start thinking about how you can start cutting down on some of those, areas where you're spending maybe a little bit too much money. And then secondly, just your possessions. So start downsizing some of the things you just don't really use that much or may not need anymore. Just something to consider.
Oh, okay. No, really great points. Really great points there. It's I like that. There's a different way to think about it. It's not just limiting yourself to a tiny physical location, but also other ways you can impact that.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Alan, thank you so much. Is there some information on how people can learn more about what you're doing at Dream Big, Live Tiny, and maybe follow along with what you have going on?
Absolutely. So our main source is our website. So you can go to www.dreambiglivetinyco.com, and you can also follow our Instagram. It's at DreamBigLiveTiny. We also have a Pinterest page. You can find us there as well, Dream Big Live Tiny, where we post more specifically related to designs and different appliances, different fixtures being used in the homes. If you want to get, into the detail of building the home or designing the home itself.
Nice. And yeah, people be careful. If you follow the Instagram page, you're going to want to get a tiny house right away. I'm just telling you, it's going to, those are good images.
Disclaimer.
Don't hold us responsible if you buy a tiny house after you go and check out those things.
Absolutely.
Alan, thank you again. Appreciate it. And yeah, definitely want to have you on again to share some more about tiny living.
Absolutely. I love that, Chris. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Thanks again to Alan from Dream Big, Live Tiny for stopping by and sharing some of his tiny living expertise and information that he did. And, thanks to all of you for joining me for what ended up being a few bags of popcorn. And, it's kind of ironic that in an episode that was all about, tiny homes and tiny living, that we ended up popping so much popcorn. But it was just, really because I'm really fascinated by tiny homes and hope that I was able to pass on some of that enthusiasm to you as a listener, because this is just something that's really interesting to me, and it just made me want to ask more and more questions, and I hope that the conversation was valuable to all of you. If you want to learn more about tiny living, make sure you visit dreambigliveTinyco.com, or you can just go to popcornfinance.com/64. And in the show notes, I'll have a link to Alan's website. I'll have some of my favorite images from their website and from his Instagram page. And then I'll also just kind of give a breakdown and a recap of today's episode. Also, make sure that you subscribe to Popcorn Finance so that way you can get all the new episodes that come out, including the special bonus Quick Pop episode that will be coming out this Wednesday. Alan will be coming back to answer a few fun, quick questions in this rapid fire kind of new format that I'm doing here with some of the guests that come on. So if you're subscribed, you'll get that episode as soon as it's released, which will be this upcoming Wednesday. Also, if you haven't done so already, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, because this week I'll be sharing some of my favorite tiny home images directly from Dream Big, Live Tiny. Alan does a great job of kind of curating, picking some amazing homes that makes me want to go live in a tiny house right away. So in addition to getting new info on the guests that'll be coming on and what we'll be talking about for the week, you'll also get to see some amazing images of some beautiful tiny homes. So as always, I appreciate you joining me here for what ended up being quite a few bags of popcorn. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week, and I'll talk to you soon.